Snapchat is one of the most popular social media platforms in the world, especially amongst Gen Z. In fact, amongst many teenagers and young adults, Snap has become a verb similar to Google or Venmo. Yet, despite their popularity, like most tech companies and startups, they lost money for most of their life. In fact, the last quarter of 2021 was the first profitable quarter in the company's history as a public company. Snapchat proudly announced this news near the top of their quarterly report, likely with optimistic expectations for the stock. Yet, it's been months since this report came out, and Snapchat stock is still doing worse than ever before. Since their peak in September of 2021, Snapchat fell a total of 70%, which correlates to a market cap loss of $95.8 billion or nearly $100 billion. They have recovered a substantial amount over the past several weeks, rallying over 50%. But even with this significant rally, they're still down over 50% from their all-time high. So, what happened to Snapchat? Taking a look back, such terrible stock performance is unfortunately not new to Snapchat. In fact, for most of Snapchat's public life, their stock price has performed horrendously. For example, right after Snapchat set an all-time high following their IPO, they proceeded to crash 83%. And this wasn't some quick 3 or 4 month crash like the COVID crash either. This was a long and drawn-out sellout that lasted nearly 2 years. By the time the sell-off ended, Snapchat was literally a penny stock coming in at less than $5 per share. This wasn't to say that Snapchat was fundamentally performing bad though. In fact, Snapchat is yet to even have a single negative quarter in terms of revenue growth. Nonetheless, it seems like investors don't want any part of Snapchat, and that brings us into Snapchat's first shortfall, which is a lack of a strong investor base. Despite being on the market for over 5 years now, Snapchat has struggled to attract investors because they lack a differentiating factor. Now, users of Snapchat would likely disagree with this statement, given that despite Facebook and YouTube's best attempts to replicate the best features of Snapchat, like stories, most Snapchat users have preferred to continue using Snapchat for specific use cases. It seems like Snapchat has mastered casual conversations better than any of their competitors. But from an investor's perspective, who cares if Snapchat fulfills some niche role within young adults' lives? On paper, Instagram is superior in almost every way. For example, in terms of demographics, 18 to 24-year-olds are Snapchat's biggest customer base, and 13 to 17-year-olds make up nearly a quarter of their user base. Meanwhile, Instagram's largest demographic is 25 to 34-year-olds, with second place going to 18 to 24-year-olds. Instagram's 13 to 17-year-old base is almost non-existent, while the 35 years and up demographic is actually quite substantial. If newer generations don't switch over to using Instagram, that could be a long-term problem. But for the time being, Instagram has no shortage of users. And all of their users are significantly older than Snapchat users, which means that they have more money, are more monetizable, and are of course more profitable. This directly aligns with household income studies conducted on both platforms as well. Snapchat use is most common amongst households with incomes between $70,000 and $80,000 per year. Meanwhile, Instagram use is most common amongst households with incomes above $100,000 per year. Again, users with more money equals more profits. Something else to note about Snapchat's demographics is that it's mostly just limited to the US. Snapchat has 109.5 million users within the US, which is nearly more than all of their users in all these countries combined. If we take a look at Instagram's usage by country, we can clearly see that it's a lot more spread out, especially amongst emerging countries. So from an investor's perspective, there's very little reason to bet on Snapchat over Facebook. If you want to target millennials and older, Instagram is the way to go. If you want to target people with money, Instagram is the way to go. And if you want to target emerging countries, Instagram is the way to go. The only reason to invest in Snapchat is if you think that younger generations in the US will continue to use Snapchat over Instagram, which could very well be true. But for this to become a financial advantage for Snapchat, we'll likely have to wait another 5 to 10 years at the very least. And in the meantime, Snapchat will likely remain the underdog amongst investors. Aside from Snapchat's unlucrative demographic, Snapchat was also hit hard with Apple's privacy changes that rolled out last year. If you guys aren't aware of this yet, in April of 2021, Apple rolled out a feature called App Tracking Transparency. This feature allows users to choose if they want to let third-party apps collect data regarding their usage for advertising purposes. And as you would guess, basically everyone opted out. According to this study, only 4% of Americans were opting in to tracking, and I have a feeling that a lot of these guys may have accidentally pressed allow. Snapchat CEO Evan Spiegel was actually a big proponent of this move. In fact, he believes that these privacy changes were good for iPhone consumers and the social media ecosystem in general. But despite his moral support for the change, this change was obviously not good for Snapchat's financials. In October of 2021, Evan announced that Apple's privacy changes have actually been affecting revenue more than they originally anticipated. And to make things worse, Snapchat failed to meet investors' already conservative revenue estimates, which of course sent the stock tumbling. Given this unfavorable situation, Evan has chosen to focus on profitability, which he did accomplish. But this has left many investors wondering at what cost. Sure, it's nice to invest in a profitable company, but the primary reason most Snapchat investors made the investment was because of growth expectations. And now, it seems like Evan is trying to appease investors with profits instead of growth. Snapchat doesn't have a PE ratio quite yet, as that requires a full year of profitability. But even if we take their net income of $22.55 million from last quarter and extrapolate it to a year, we only get about $100 million. Now, this isn't a bad amount by any means, but compared to their market cap, this gives them a PE ratio of 673. Even if we say that Snapchat's profitability grows to $250 million per quarter or 10x from where they currently are, their PE ratio would still be quite high at 67.3. To put that in perspective, Facebook's PE ratio is under 20. This isn't exactly a bad thing given that Snapchat should theoretically have a lot more growth left than Facebook. But that's the key, they need to have growth. And with Apple's privacy policy changes and potentially more on the way, investors aren't quite convinced to give Snapchat even more credit. At this point, you may be thinking, what could possibly be worse than having slower growth and a less profitable user base? Well, the answer is being replaced. But wait a minute, Snapchat has a massive user base, most of whom are young, so Snapchat won't be going anywhere anytime soon, right? Well, while that may be true, that doesn't prevent an old or new competitor from overtaking Snapchat. Just take a look at TikTok. TikTok wasn't released till September of 2016, yet it was the most visited site in the world in 2021. This isn't to say that it's easy to replicate TikTok's success, but it makes it clear that the barrier for entry is extremely low within the social media industry. From an app development perspective, it's not particularly hard to create a social media app. What's hard is garnering users, and 99.999% of social media apps will never garner the same user base of Snapchat or Facebook. But from Snapchat's perspective, only 1 or 2 of the millions of social media apps out there need to catch on for Snapchat to lose user engagement to these new apps. And from a user's perspective, if a new, better app comes out, the only thing stopping you from switching over is your friends also switching over. If your social circle switches over, you'll probably never look back, and this has been shown time and time again within the social media industry. First, there was Friendster, then there was MySpace, then we had Facebook and Twitter, and after that we had Instagram and WhatsApp, and now we have Snapchat. What's to say that Snapchat won't eventually be phased out as well? Well, the truth is that all companies are eventually phased out. It's just that the phase at the top is rather short-lived for social media companies due to their low barrier of entry. Take Apple for example, they also won't stay at the top forever. But think about how much more difficult it is for a company to come out with a smartphone and convince you to pay several $100s for it, as opposed to an app developer coming out with a social media app and convincing you to give it a shot. Obviously, the latter is magnitudes easier, which is great for competition and evolution, but not great for investors. For example, just take a look at Twitter stock. They really haven't moved in nearly a decade. Not to mention, Twitter has become unprofitable once again and Jack Dorsey has left the company. Really, the only social media stock that has performed extremely well historically is Facebook, and that's mainly thanks to the acquisitions of WhatsApp and Instagram. Also, something to note about Facebook is that while they have performed well financially, they're one of the most hated, if not the most hated company in the world. So I don't think that's necessarily something that Snapchat should strive for. But at the same time, if they don't make acquisitions and become the big tech company that everyone hates, it's just a matter of time until the new kid on the block overtakes them anyway. While this video has mostly pointed out the shortfalls of Snapchat and the social media industry, I don't think Snapchat is going anywhere anytime soon. They just became profitable, their user base is just starting to make money, and there's still plenty of user growth left for Snapchat. So I don't think Snapchat has really hit their stride yet, meaning that Snapchat stock likely has a lot of upside ahead. But with that being said, I don't think Snapchat is a lifelong hold like many other investments such as the S&P 500, Tesla, Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc. Whether Snapchat peaks at a market cap of $300 billion or a market cap of $1 trillion, I think it's just a matter of time until they're phased out. And I think the next wave of phasing will be extremely painful. I think the next phase will not only be a move away from Snapchat, but a move away from traditional social media in general. With more people being aware of how these companies make money, an increasing concern for privacy, and more backlash than ever before against big tech, I think it's highly likely that the next big social media app will be some sort of decentralized or non-profit endeavor like Signal. I suspect Mark Zuckerberg has similar beliefs, and that's why he cut back on social media acquisitions and is betting it all on the metaverse. With that being said, I think an investment into Snapchat would be more of a median horizon investment of 10 to 15 years. You may be able to get in, make a solid 10x, and get out. But in my opinion, if you're gonna commit to a stock for 10 to 15 years, why not commit to something that you can hold on to life that can produce a 30, 40, or 50x return? But that's just what I think. Would you guys invest in Snapchat? Comment that down below. Also, drop a like if you use Snapchat. And of course, consider checking out our international channels to watch our videos in other languages, and consider subscribing to see more questions logically answered. But until then, I'm Hari, and I'll see you guys on the next one.